Okay, so are we streaming then, Jamie?
It looks like it's just starting to kick up.
Okay, and today is the 11th. Okay, meeting materials. Okay. There's Senator Wasserberger. Perfect timing.
I think you guys are going.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we're up on the YouTube stream is up and running. So let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. If we can go ahead, just take a roll call vote to start out with.
Senator Biteman.
Here.
Senator Coe.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Wasserberger.
He's present.
He's
Yep.
muted.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Crank.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer.
Here.
Representative Furphy.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Laux.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Chairman Greer.
Here.
All present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Appreciate that. So we'll start the meeting. So we are here to take back up. It'd be 20 LSO draft 0706, COVID-19 Business Relief Program. We heard this last Thursday, took testimony, worked the bill till about 7:30 at night. Is that about how late we went? We closed public testimony, so we will not be taking any more. The purpose of this meeting was for us to be able to come back, look at some technical amendments, look at let the committees make further comments or further refinements on this bill. The whole idea being is hopefully we're able to pass this bill out of this committee, let LSO get it ready, get a fiscal note put on it, and hand it over to our respective bodies for consideration this Friday. So that's why, again, we circled back on this meeting. A couple of things that, so Mr. Fuller had put together and sent out. Brian, did that go to all of the committee members? I call them technical amendments, but they're more substantive in nature, dealing with flex authority between the programs, tying in with the other bills we're going to hear in special session regarding flex authority, B11 authority, and then also what I'm going to call a safety net trap door regarding forgiveness of loans by the end of the year, depending upon what the federal guidance does. Did everybody get that? I'm seeing heads and thumbs up and everything perfect. So if the committee will, unless somebody disagrees here, what I would like to do is maybe have Brian or Mr. Fuller address that amendment, help walk us through it, what it means. I think it gives the governor's office a tremendous amount of flexibility to see how these programs work as they roll out. And then if we can do that, discuss those, and then maybe adopt that amendment or whatever the committee's pleasure is. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you referenced working draft 0.6 is what we would be working from. I believe we're going to be working from 0.8. Is that accurate?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, for the committee and for anyone following along out there, we are on version 0.8, which is a version that's on the LSO website, because that's the one I just pulled up to make sure we were current. Thanks, Senator. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. I'm still getting used to all the screens and buttons. So Mr. Fuller, if you would, if everybody's ready, just go ahead and hit that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It should be a two-page amendment entitled Proposed Amendments to 20 LSO 706. The first line that's amended is page 10, line 23, just to make sure everyone has the correct copy. In a nutshell, this amendment does three things. The first is that it provides that the appropriations for each of the three programs that are created in the bill draft come from, I suppose, what colloquially has been called the first phase of the CARES Act funding. So in another one of the bills, that Management Council voted to sponsor, it specifies that of the 1.25 billion, 450 million of that is available immediately after enactment, another 400 million on July 15th, and then the rest on September 15th, absent legislation to the contrary. And so the changes that are the bulk of the first page clarify that the 3 appropriations in this bill draft come from that first phase of funding, from that first $450 million. So that's what the changes on pages 11, page 19, and page 23 are for. Then moving on to section 5, Mr. Chairman, this part of the amendment does 2 things. So first, it specifies that between the effective date of this act, whenever it is enacted, and December 30th, 2020, the governor, I'm looking now on page 2, this is paragraph 1 at the top of page 2, authorizes the governor to transfer funds between the 3 programs that are created in this act. And just based on the chairman's direction, 25% of the funding of each program could be moved to a different program. That number, though, is certainly for the committee to decide what that should be. So it can be transferred by the governor as beneficial or necessary for the state to respond to the public health crisis and the impacts caused by COVID-19. And then moving on to paragraph 2, this authorizes the governor to transfer the money from these 3 programs, 25% of that, to any of the other programs that are authorized in 2020 House Bill / Senate File 1001. And those generally deal with responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then subsection B just provides that any transfer is reported to this committee and to joint appropriations as the B11 flex transfer would be done normally.
So Brian, I just wanted to make sure the governor can also B11 into these programs. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that language is not contemplated in this section. And I would need to check if that is true of the other bills. If one of the other bills would allow that authority into this. But as drafted right now, this section would not let the governor bring in, say, for example, the entire 1.25 billion into these 3 programs.
Okay, so I think we need to, my understanding of the committee is we want him to be able to B11 in. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my expectation is that unless we're explicitly precluding it in this legislation, that the bills that we're working through the Management Council would provide broad flexibility and authority to B11 in or even flex in pretty much anything with some pretty large limits. With regular agency funds, those limits would be vast, and with the 1.25 billion, I think we would provide full authority. Is there anything that precludes that from taking place through the way this is drafted, Mr. Fuller?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't think there's anything in this amendment that expressly precludes the other actions that are contemplated in I believe it's House Bill, Senate File 1003, where the budget in that bill draft, there's an amendment to the 2020 budget that gives flex authority between executive branch agencies to respond to the COVID pandemic.
Okay, and Senator Rothfuss, I agree. My understanding of the Management Council bills is that we could be 11 in. The reason why I asked a specific question is I understood this committee wanted that to be the case. I also had made a representation to the governor's office that would be the case unless the committee felt otherwise. So I just want to make sure we're good on that particular issue. Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely agree. I think in particular, our first grant program probably ends up needing more money at some point. We want to make sure that there's no barrier to that taking place.
So, and I agree. As you'll notice, my hair care professional, which gets 2 thumbs up this morning, got my hair cut, and I was making sure that her and her colleagues were aware of what we were doing, so to help them through this time. Yeah. Any questions on these amendments? Looks like Chairman Anderson.
Are,
Yeah.
are we going to take this as one amendment, the whole thing? Not each one. We're going to just move the whole thing, aren't we?
If that's what I don't see any reason not to. To me, they all kind of come together. So
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
questions, Representative Burkhart.
Mr. Chairman, no questions. I would just move these 2 pages as an amendment.
I would
Okay.
second that.
Okay, been moved and seconded.
Point of order.
Okay.
Point of
I
order.
heard a point of order. Yeah.
We don't have a motion on the bill itself yet, so we're going to have to move the draft, and then we'll have to do the amendments.
Well, Senator Rothfuss, we left this open. I mean, we moved it and then worked the amendments and never voted on the bill on Thursday.
Mr. Chairman, if we did, I think that's probably assumed to be tabled because we have literally a different working draft at this point in time that we're working from. So I think we would want to move the current working draft and then move the amendment thereafter so that we're
Well, just because
legit.
it's Monday, I'd love to argue with you, but it'll just be easier to go ahead and do that then.
Probably.
Okay. Chair will entertain a motion to move the.
I'd move
this draft 0.8.
I'd move 0.8.
You've been moved and seconded. All right. Representative Burkhart, would you restate your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move the 2 pages we have as a draft as an amendment to the bill.
Okay, and that was seconded by Chairman Anderson.
Second, yes.
Okay, any discussion on this amendment, committee? Further discussion? Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor, please raise your hand. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's unanimous. Unless Senator Rothfuss wants me to call for the noes. Okay. Next, what I would ask is for Mr. Fuller to walk us through our amendments, probably section by section. I understand that there may be some comments from the committee regarding calculation of FTEs. I also think we may revisit the issue regarding compensation for servicing the program in bucket 2. So, yeah, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on process. If we have proposed amendments, do you want us to bring them up as we go through the bill or hold them until we've gone through all the previous amendments?
Why don't we bring them up as we get to that point, to the extent that we can?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just have Mr. Fuller hit our highlights of our amendments, just make sure we did what we intended to do. And then if there are further refinements of that would be great. You know, like I said, my goal was for this to hopefully be a relatively short meeting. So, okay.
Mr. Chairman, first off, I would just note that pages 4 through 6, the findings, the reference is now to public health crisis. So that was one of the amendments the committee adopted, and that change has been made throughout the findings. Moving on to section 2, beginning on page 7, line 12, this is the reference to.
Yep, just give us a chance to get there. Okay. Got it. All right.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So page 7, line 12, this was an amendment to the definition of eligible business regarding the number of employees. It now specifies that the business must have had employed on March 31st, the equivalent of 50 full-time employees or less. And then a clarifying sentence was added just to ensure that both full-time employees and part-time employees are captured within that count for the equivalency.
Okay, so that's Representative Burkhart McGuire. Burkhart. Yeah, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I sent to you a little while ago, probably about 10 minutes before we started, printed suggested amendment so that you'd have it in front of you. But I would propose an amendment to Section D, starting on line 12 and somewhere in there, and it may need to be a separate section, the following amendment. The number of equivalent full-time employees shall be determined by dividing all verifiable Wyoming employee hours worked between March 2019 and March 2020 by 2,080 hours. The business owner shall be counted as one equivalent full-time employee. And if I can get a second, we can
Yep.
discuss.
Is there a Representative McGuire? Okay. Go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
So, Mr. Chairman, the idea being is we've defined the calculation on what a full-time equivalent employee is. Use the 1 year in the form of 12 previous months to take care of the seasonal workers, the logging companies, the ski resorts, summer tourist season, and that. And the 2,080 hours comes in as that's a standard feature in business of the number of hours worked by an employee, a full-time employee in a year, accounts for 40 hours per week. There are other calculations, but using that number actually gives a little bit of a benefit to businesses rather than using a lower number. It results in fewer full-time equivalents in effect. And then the reason for the business owner is that business owners rarely count themselves in their employee hours. They really don't even keep track of them because it would look ridiculous. Most small business owners that are private businesses, they're working almost 24 hours a day. So that's the reason for it, and that's the logic behind it. Just gives some basis to the calculation of full-time equivalent.
Does this help with the seasonal employee issue as well, Representative?
Mr. Chairman, it does by using the annual hours. Like, you know, in the summer, you get a lot of the tourist industry hires temporary people. It would help with companies who give summer jobs to students. And then on the other end, those companies that work heavily in the winter but don't work in the summer. So yeah, it tends to levelize a lot of that by using the 12 months.
Okay. Before we go and just go ahead, Chairman Anderson, you bet. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at this paragraph D. Is this a total replacement for paragraph D? Because it has different definitions of what a FTE is as of March 31st. I like Representative Burkhart's better.
That's a great question. And so a question I had for Mr. Fuller was, are we better to take this motion and put it somewhere towards the end of each section to provide the business council with direction on how to manage or define FTEs? Because we use that term throughout the programs, right? So wouldn't we need this language in numerous places? Could we use it as more of sideboards for rulemaking?
Mr. Chairman, I think this language would be okay to go in D. It would also need to go in the loan program as well, where there's a reference to the full-time equivalency. But those are the only two places that this needs to be amended into in order for there to be direction to the business council. My suggestion would be to delete that second sentence in D and replace it with the language that Representative Burkhart provided.
Okay. Could you, Mr. Fuller, help us and point us to where that would be in the Section 2 program?
Mr. Chairman, it's on page 12.
Or Section 3 program, I'm sorry.
Mr.
Page
Chairman,
12?
page 12, paragraph D.
Okay. Would the first and second be opposed to expanding their motion to include both places?
Mr. Chairman, I do not. That was my intention anyway.
Okay, all right. Committee all on board? Senator Rothfuss? You're muted, Senator.
Yep, there we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd honestly rather let this level of detail go to rules. And the concern I have is if we want to keep this ridiculously simple, which we do, I think, for the first one, having to go back through and verify through paperwork every hour worked between over an entire span of 1 year, to do that math. Honestly, just I don't know that it's worth the time, because I don't care that much that they get it exactly right, if that makes sense. I mean, the way we had it written with just 50 full-time employees or less on a date certain, that's like it's about 1 minute of work. And as we're trying to reduce the bureaucracy, particularly in this first one, I don't want to make bureaucracy just so that we can make sure that we get every hour properly accounted. And if somebody's at 3 hours over verifiably, then they exclude themselves. And that's what effectively happens. I work hard enough to get to the point where I can exclude myself from the process if I can get enough verification of hours. And that almost seems counterintuitive to our objective. They'll already be filing this. They already have to file the number of employees they have, full-time employees. And I'd rather find a way that it's just checking the same thing they're filing with workers' comp or unemployment insurance, and basically the same boxes you've got there. You're just going to refer to. That's my proof. Here's my number. Let's roll. And maybe for the loan program, we want more, but for this section 1, I don't feel like we need more.
Was that a motion to divide then, the amendment?
Well, if we moved it into, I don't know, I guess I'd be curious whether we even need it for the loan section, but I really don't want it for this one. So I will ask that it be divided and we address them separately.
Okay. That's divisible. So, okay. So we'll just take up the first program, the grant program. First, any further discussion on that regarding calculation of FTEs? Let me go with Representative Henderson, and I'll let Representative Burkhart follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I support the division. Forgive the background noise, but really I'd like more information on why we decided, or what went into deciding March 20th, the specificity. Thank you. Sorry.
Are you asking why we use March 31st? Was that your question? No, you're muted. We can't hear your dog. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Good. I'm glad you didn't hear the background noise. What I heard when it was read was something about a period of March 20th to March 31st. Did I hear that wrong?
No, it is March 31st. Yes.
Oh, only. Okay. All right. I misheard it. Sorry.
And I believe, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but we are looking at that was the end of the first quarter in 2020, which is a very recognizable point in time for your employees. You're already filing quarterly reports, so you should know that. Is that right, committee? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Representative Burkhart. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason for the verifiable Wyoming employees is we have small construction companies here in Wyoming, but they work other places and their employees are domiciled in other places. They bring them in for part of the year to work and then they go back. We only want to count Wyoming hours. We don't want to count hours in other states, was the reason for that. And I've talked to some of the agencies. There is not a formal, other than I could find, definition of what is full-time or part-time employees. The IRS says for some of their stuff, any employee hours over 30 hours a week counts as a full-time employee. Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't have a definition. I don't think Department of Workforce Services has a definition. So in effect, by allowing this to go through rule and regulation, we would be allowing the Business Council to come up with a definition of what a full-time equivalent is. I think they had originally thought of using something like 32 hours a week. The reason for the 1 year time frame, the 12-month time frame on hours, which goes from quarter to quarter, in 2 different years would be to account for all the seasonal workers and give them credit for that. There are some companies really, you know, in the winter, they might have 5 employees. In the summer, they might have 500, depending on the nature of their business. So that was the logic for all of it. And like I said, the logic on the business owner was that owners rarely count themselves in the business. They rarely even give themselves a paycheck. And that's actually been a problem with some of the PPP stuff. They don't have a W-2. So that's the logic behind it.
Okay, I'm going to go with, I had Chairman Anderson, Representative Laux, and then I think Senator Rothfuss was next. Okay.
My question is, what is the first division? Is it just the page 7, line 12, inserting there? Is that the first division, or what's the first division?
Mr. Chairman, the first division was on the grant program, page, somebody help me, was it page 7?
Page 7. Yeah, is the grant program.
Yeah.
And that's the first division, whether or not we put this amendment in the first division, right?
That is correct. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, on page 7, beginning on, well, it was line 12D, is
Right.
section D. It was that second sentence. That's what we're considering now is the grant program. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Representative Laux?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just, during listening to the representative's amendment, I motioned for one of my right hands in my office to come over here. And we work off QuickBooks with payroll, and I think a whole lot of people do. In fact, our accountants won't even work with anybody that doesn't use QuickBooks and payroll. And she said that she can produce a report in like one keystroke that generates all the hours in any 12-month period or any period we ask for. So it isn't a hard ask. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Rothfuss and Representative Ayer.
Okay, that's good to hear. I appreciate that from Representative Laux, that as long as that would be something that would be appropriate as data. But again, I want to go back to what this paragraph does, and I'd ask everyone to think through what this paragraph does. This paragraph determines eligibility for the program. Do you have 50 full-time employees or less? Yes or no? That's all this does. It doesn't determine dollar values. It doesn't have anything else. It's just a binary question. Are you eligible for this program? And the question is, do you have 50 full-time employees or less? So the idea that we need a complex mechanism for calculating anything about that, when all we're trying to do is determine a binary eligibility, again, it still just doesn't seem necessary. If what Representative Burkhart wants is the idea that we're giving full credit for seasonal employees over the past year, which now I see a policy interest for that, that's not this D paragraph. That's Romanet 3 on page 9 under the B paragraph, where we would have to change language. So if that's the policy interest, we're doing it wrong.
Okay, Representative Ayer.
My comment's already been addressed, Mr. Chairman.
And what was that? Just restate it. It was.
Well, I was just going to reiterate what Representative Laux commented on it. That 12-month hours worked is a pretty easy calculation in most businesses.
Okay, thank you, Representative. You bet. Okay, so Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only issue is, though, we haven't said 50 full-time employees. What we have said is had employed the equivalent of 50 full-time employees or less. So we need to define what equivalent means, is the reason for this. If you leave equivalent in there and no definition, you could make it whatever you wanted to, really.
Okay.
That's the logic.
Yep. Okay. Senator Rothfuss. Then this just maybe bring her home for a vote.
Well, yeah, I think it's more important than that, because it depends on what our policy interest is. And again, I didn't even think we had equivalent in before, and I'm curious if that was part of an amendment. I thought we simply had on March 31st, 2020, had employed 50 full-time employees or less. And honestly, that's sufficient.
So Senator, we did amend we had the discussion regarding the coffee shop, I think was the example used, that has a lot of part-time employees. And
Right.
so that did come in as part of our debate on Thursday.
But Mr. Chairman, that debate was focused on paragraph 3, 2 pages from now as being necessary. It wasn't necessary here because all we have to do is decide, is this an eligible business? Does it have less than 50 full-time employees? Bing. So we don't need equivalent. We don't need part-time. We don't need anything else here. And I don't think we probably should have changed it here. We should have changed it in Romanet 3. And I think everything that Representative Burkhart is asking for makes good sense in paragraph 3 as a better means of calculation if we want to do that. But not here. It seems that if we want to amend it, the way to amend it is simply to take it down to, on March 31st, 2020, had employed 50 full-time employees or less. End of sentence.
Okay, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, just as a point of reference, when it comes to the unemployment benefits and such, they are eligible and calculated based on if they are an employee, if they receive just 1 hour of employment. So just a reference, you are an employee, even if you only receive 1 hour worth of employment. So it doesn't matter how many hours you work, even if it's just 1 hour, you're considered an employee. So not that matters here or there, but that I'm swayed to Senator Rothfuss, that I think our argument actually needs to be in paragraph 3. I think I agree. I think that's where it needs to be referenced, because that's where all of this tends to be going.
Okay, so if we, let me just try to succinctly do this. One is you got to look at the statistics that we heard in Management Council. 93% of our employers in the state of Wyoming have less than 50 employees, and that's no distinction between full-time and part-time. Okay, so just so we know what we're working with. This could very well, following Senator Rothfuss's recommendation, narrow the scope, kick a couple of businesses out that may have a lot of part-time employees. But as I understand it, if we want to be more refined, we really need to be in the paragraph where we're doling out money based upon the part-time, full-time provision. Is that a good synopsis of the debate that we've had here? Okay. All right. So Representative Burkhart, I'll let you bring us home, and then we can decide how we want to vote on the first division of your amendment.
Mr. Chairman, a question though. Do I need to, if we put it in paragraph 3 on page 9, because there are numerous paragraph 3s, do I need to modify my amendment?
So Representative Burkhart, here's where we are. I think if we want to pull out, this is what I'm sensing. Now, this is where being remote is hard. Where being in person is easier. What I'm sensing is that we want to make this a very simple process. We need to get that part-time equivalent out and just say 50 employees, and then come down to where we're doing the different dollar amounts and insert your amendment. Is that what I'm sensing out of the committee?
Yes.
Heads nodding, the thumbs up from Chris.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If that's the case, I think Representative Burkhart, it might be better to go ahead and just vote on both your divisions, vote them down, and then move down and then clean up from there from a process standpoint.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, a question then for discussion. would this, I guess you could almost call it a definition of equivalent full-time employee, be better placed in the definition section?
Well, that was my initial question on that. But I think if I heard this right, and if I'm sensing this correctly, is on page 7, line 12, is we just want to say had employed, and you're saying the equivalent of 50 full-time employees or less, period.
No, I think we said we wanted to say had employed 50 full-time employees or less. We eliminated the equivalent and the equivalent of.
Okay.
But that's another motion.
So I guess my question is, for someone who may know the rules better than I, can we withdraw the pending amendment? Is that what you'd like to do, Representative Burkhart? Representative McGuire?
Mr. Chairman, I would withdraw the amendment and bring it up at a later time.
Is that good with the second, which was Representative McGuire?
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't hear you very well, Joe.
I'd like to make a comment to that.
Sure.
Before we fold our tent on this and move on, the issue is that as people are moving through this in a chronological fashion, the people who are determining eligibility. So an individual comes in and the first criteria is 50 full-time employees or less. And I agree completely with Representative Burkhart. So here's the question. If you have 2 part-timers, does that equal 1 FT? If you have 4 part-timers that are working 100 hours, do you multiply that and say, well, that's 4,000 hours annually? I just think that in this first criteria, I agree with Representative Burkhart that he's got the right idea, that you define what an FTE is, you include the owner, and then you define what the part-timers are. Take those hours, divide it, and that is where you meet that first criteria. I'm not going to argue it very hard, but I think that, in my opinion, Representative Burkhart had the logical, chronological way of going through this. Thank you very much.
Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, in this first section, I don't think we're addressing part-time. We're addressing if they have 50 full-time employees or less, and that's all the definition is. They could have 100 part-time employees, and it wouldn't qualify in this section. This section needs to be simple, and it needs to be just 50 full-time employees.
Okay. Well, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's understanding that if you are the owner, you're a full-time employee. So you're already meeting the qualification. So I think it's understood.
Okay. All right. Well, respecting the process, the second didn't withdraw. So this go ahead. Are we ready to vote on division number 1 of Representative Burkhart's motion?
Yes.
Question being called. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I count 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I vote no, 10. Okay, that division fails. We'll move on to division 2, which was on page 12. Somebody help me with the line.
Line 13.
12, line 13.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've debated the overall issues. Do we need to discuss the second division any further?
No.
Okay, sensing we're ready to vote. All those in favor of division 2, please raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, my count is off. At 9, so it must have been 10 again. Okay, Myself, sorry. It's Monday morning. Thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move to amend on page 7, lines 12 through 16, to delete on line 13 equivalent of, and then delete the balance of the paragraph beginning with 4 on line 13. So for purposes of this paragraph, et cetera, so that what it remains is on line 12, D on March 31st, 2020, had employed 50 full-time employees or less, period.
Okay. Second? Is there a second? Representative Duncan, any further discussion on the issue? Okay. Yeah, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then how are we going to address and cure the issue that comes up with seasonal workers? Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in this section, we wouldn't address that. I think we addressed that in the paragraph down below. And this is simply a hard, fast, are you a small business by definition of do you have on March 31st, 50 full-time employees or less? If the answer is yes, you're eligible for this program. If the answer is no, you're not eligible for the program. And then we can move down and figure out how we want to calculate, and we can switch to this formula. I think it's rational to go to Representative Burkhart's formula. We might have to amend it a little bit to fit in that paragraph, but the concept, so that we then address the seasonal employees in that manner.
Okay. Further discussion? Any question being called? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'll be 10. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. My math is correct. Okay, that motion passes. Okay. Do we want to then move down and address that particular issue in on page 9? Okay. And then we can get back to Mr. Fuller going through our amendments. Representative Burkhart. You're muted still, Don.
Thank you. I'll figure this out sometime. Mr. Chairman, I would propose an amendment on page 9, paragraph Romanet 3, to include the language I previously proposed as an amendment. Yeah, I'll read it again if anyone wants.
Okay.
I guess no one wants.
Reread that, and then we'll check with Mr. Fuller to see exactly how we would place that into the paragraph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment would read, the number of equivalent full-time employees shall be determined by dividing all verifiable Wyoming employee hours worked between March of 2019 and March 2020 by 2,080 hours. The business owner shall be counted as one full-time equivalent employee.
Okay, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the Representative Burkhart would consider it a friendly amendment to say, change it a little bit and say, instead of between March 2019 and March 2020, to just say that worked in the 12-month period ended March 31, 2020.
Okay, would you second his motion first, Representative Bear?
Second.
Okay, and then
That's friendly.
Okay, so with that, Mr. Fuller, can that fit in? Can you figure out how to get that fit in there cleanly?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can. The language that was provided, I believe, would define what a full-time employee is for purposes of this paragraph for determining how many employees would qualify for that, you know, a $2,000 per employee payment. The question I think that's unanswered here, if we're changing this to be divisible by hours, is whether the reference to the $1,000 for every part-time employee would still be needed, and how that would work mathematically, since we're basically calculating just a full-time equivalent.
Okay, so I had Senator Rothfuss, Duncan, and then the co-chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think you would take out the $1,000 for every part-time employee. And I think the structure you'd probably use would be something like be $15,000 plus an additional $2,000 for every full-time equivalent employee. And then you would say, for purposes of this paragraph, a full-time equivalent employee shall be or the number of full-time equivalent employees shall be determined by blah, blah, blah. And I think that ends up working it out. Then you eliminate all references to part-time. So if it's 2,000 per full-time equivalent employee, you calculate the number of full-time equivalent employees using Representative Burkhart's formula, and you get a number.
Okay, let's hold that thought, except for the blah, blah, blah. Let's hold the rest of the thought. And then Representative Duncan.
Just a point of clarification. So what happens if a couple owns the business and mom works for the business? How do you calculate something like that?
Okay, Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I really like the language just like it sits with the 2,000 for every full-time employee and the 1,000 for every part-time employee at that time. I think that addresses everything we need to address, and I speak against the amendment.
Okay. All right, so Representative Burkhart, we had a suggestion from Senator Rothfuss for further. Is that a friendly amendment, or is that too complicated to work in?
Mr. Chairman, I would say it's kind of friendly. However, we need to remember that equivalent full-time employees and full-time employees are not necessarily the same thing. You know, equivalent is just a calculation, and full-time is whatever you define full-time as being. And I'm just trying to give some definition to it. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here.
So that kind of goes back to Senator Anderson, either part-time or full-time, and forget equivalent. Okay, go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this amendment captures the part-time equivalency very well, and they would get the credit for any part-time employees based on the hours worked. So I think Senator Rothfuss' suggestion was a good one.
Okay, well, procedurally, what we have is the motion from Representative Burkhart regarding how we calculate. Go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, to make this easier, if Senator Rothfuss would repeat his, I think we just make it a friendly amendment and include it and vote.
So why don't we do this? I saw Mr. Fuller taking notes. Mr. Fuller, could you restate the combined suggestions of the committee and see if the first and second want to take that to a vote of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, from everything I've heard, the way I understand paragraph 3, this is page 9, line 4 would read, the 15,000 would still be the same, plus an additional $2,000 for every one full-time equivalent employee that the eligible business had employed in Wyoming on March 31st, 2020. So everything after employee on line 6, line 7 entirely, and then employee on line 8 would be deleted. Then on line 9 after 2020, the language that Representative Burkhart provided would be inserted there as a new sentence. And my understanding is that Representative Ayer also suggested worked in the 12-month period immediately preceding March 31st, 2020, which I believe was a friendly amendment. And then that last sentence would be added. And then back on line 9, the sentence that's currently in there, in no event, that would also remain.
Okay, that to me sounds like a good summary of that. So Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I thought this was a good idea and I've changed my mind. And here's the reason. If my business has been only open for half a year and all of a sudden coronavirus hit, I'm going to get half the money based on this calculation, when at the end of the day, on March 31st, 2020, I still had the same number of employees I had to deal with. And so it doesn't quite work.
Okay, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that it's going to be less money for the small business, because if you have 4 employees who work quarter time, that's a benefit of $4,000. If you turn those 4 into 1 FTE, that's $2,000. And the whole point of this is to help out the businesses. So I would argue, or I would urge us to go back to Representative Burkhart's original language. I think that's the most logical. Thank you.
Wait.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what that would have meant. Representative McGuire, going back to original language, how that would change the outcome relative to the calculation he just suggested.
So committee, you guys are challenging me very seriously on a Monday morning. I'm just going to tell you that right now. And when I show up at work, my employees usually run from me on Monday morning. So I'm showing remarkable constraints. All right. So Representative McGuire, what did you mean by back to Representative Burkhart's original language?
I believe, and this has gotten a bit obtuse at this point, but when you go in, the original language was 50 full-time or less, and then it was modified by both full-time and part-time employees shall be counted in the calculation of full-time equivalent employees.
Okay, we've already voted on that, though.
I understand that, but that was when Representative Burkhart originally drafted his amendment. You had the amendment, or excuse me, you had the definition in there that was counting the calculation of full-time equivalent. So I believe that, and Representative Burkhart can correct me, but you've got the owner, 1 FTE, and then if you have full-time employees, which are defined as 2,080 hours, and then you take the part-timers and divide them by 2,000 hours and figure out how many part-time equivalents. And I don't want to start running, so I'll let Representative Burkhart figure it out the rest of the way.
Well, let's try to bring this to, okay, Representative Furphy, you had your hand up. And I'm going to try to bring this to something we can vote on and move forward with.
Well, I agree, but I agree with Senator Rothfuss. If we pass that amendment and we've only got a business that's working for half of a year, for them to calculate full-time equivalent employees is going to be a disadvantage to them. So I'm almost inclined to go back to the original language that's in the bill and pass it that way. So I just pass it on to him.
Okay. Representative Laux.
Mr. Chairman, so I really believe what Representative Burkhart came up with is a good deal. And I hate to use personal examples because I remember Chairman Lockhart telling me you never do that in testimony in a committee. But so if you look at how my company operates, when we have a big job going somewhere around the state, we'll hire on 6 or 8 people from workforce services, whatever. We put them on the payroll because we want to make sure they're covered by unemployment insurance and workers' comp and all that. So, and we'll go to a different city. And so we'll do that 3 or 4 times in different cities. So we're bringing on 6 or 8 people to work for 2 days or a week for us. And then they'll show up as a full-time employee if we don't put some limitations on it with the calculations that Burkhart came up with. That would allow me, if I was to apply for one of these, to sort of game it. And I've got all of these part-time employees, but they really aren't part-time employees. But I mean, anyway, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I had Chairman Anderson and then Representative Crank. Chairman Anderson, would you?
Mr. Chairman, I think the original language allows the company to make more money. We changed that the last time so they could make more money. And I would like to have that left alone. I'm speaking against the amendment.
Yep. Representative Crank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll speak against the amendment. The point of section 2 is the Wyoming business interruption stipend. So when the orders went out on the 15th or so, this was the people you had then who basically lost their job or employment for a while to replace those. So I'm going to speak against making this spread out your hours through the whole year. It's for who you had going when.
Okay. Now I'm sensing, go ahead, Senator Coe.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to the amendment as well. I think the original language, we're kicking tires, by trying to do all this stuff, and gosh, I just think the original language is pretty good, and I think we ought to leave it alone. So I speak against the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Senator Wassenberger? Well, you hadn't spoke. Okay. I didn't want to let my Campbell County brethren hang out there at all. So, Representative Burkhart.
Mr. Chairman, all I was going to do is just call for the question. We beat this up enough.
Yeah, no, it's good discussion though. Good discussion.
I think Representative Bear has something.
Yeah, Representative Bear.
Just one comment. I agree we beat this to death, but if we leave it as it is right now, you could have an employee work 1 hour and be counted a part-time employee.
Yep. Okay, Representative McGuire.
Thank you. And I understand that everybody is tired and that this is a complicated issue, but I would point again to, if you just make the date that it is calculated from in March, if you have people who hire employees to haul sugar beets or haul cattle or whatever, because we have a lot of seasonal businesses, you're going to exclude them, and they're going to be hurt just as much tomorrow or next week because of the seasonal nature of their business. I think that we need to work hard to make sure that we encompass all of the seasonal businesses in the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Question was called by Representative Burkhart. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Math adds up. Okay. The motion's defeated. All right. Good discussion though. That's when we come back on this. All right. So Mr. Fuller, could you take us back from, I think we were on page 7, hitting the amendments that we had talked about on Thursday, or that we had made on Thursday. Just hitting the highlights of the amendments.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So back to page 7, right after subparagraph D, subparagraph E, which held a requirement that an eligible business could not have received any PPP funding or other federal CARES Act funding, that was deleted. We've discussed the amendment on page 9, lines 4 through 10, the reference to changing the amount of the grant for full-time and part-time employees. Then on page 9, line 18 is a new subsection C. And this is the language where the business council must give preference to those businesses that did not receive funding under the Paycheck Protection Program. And that goes on to page 10, lines 1 and 2.
So I had a quick question. Oh, go ahead, Representative Duncan.
Just a quick question for clarification. And it's not really up to us. It's going to be up to the business council, but how do we know, how would they know whether they did or didn't? I mean, is that an issue?
So I'll address that. In looking at their draft, because trying to push this program out, they did a 1-page draft application, 1 page, okay? And it's a series of certifications, just like the PPP, where you're certified along those lines. And then to follow up on that is this as of the date of submitting. So that's the preference is each date they look at a preference. Is that right, Brian? Is that how that would be interpreted?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. So the look back would be when they submit the application, did they or did they not receive the PPP funding?
Yeah, okay. Okay, everybody good? Okay, keep going, Brian.
All right, Mr. Chairman, on to page 10, and this is the same for all three programs. The language regarding the audits allows the council discretion to conduct or contract for random audits. So that language is now permissive. And then at the bottom of page 10, the appropriation for this first stipend program was increased from 25 million to $50 million. Moving on to section 3, page 12, the reference, and this has already been discussed, to the full-time equivalent of employees being 100 or less. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if the first motion that took out the reference to equivalent in the first program, if the committee has desire to change that here as well.
Senator Rothfuss.
So moved, mirrored language.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Duncan. I didn't think the first motion did, so I think we need to address this. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. So I see 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Okay, the math is correct. That motion passes. Okay, continue.
And then, Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 14, this would be at the paragraph 2, so line 10. This amendment clarified that the financial institutions would serve as servicers of any loans that are made under this program. And the language was changed to clarify that those servicers can provide applications that the Business Council gives them and then forward those applications to the council for review and approval. Page 15, line 2, subparagraph A, this changed the interest rate to 0%. And then beginning line 4 on page 15, a new sentence that states that the Business Council pays a 1% fee of the amount of each loan to the financial institution as a servicing fee.
Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan has a question.
Yep, Representative Duncan.
Quite sure where that's coming from, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was inundated over the weekend with some additional information from financial institutions. And so I would like to propose an amendment on the servicing portion. It's come to my attention that the servicing portion, the fee of the 1%, that the institutions are receiving a 5% to do the PPPs currently. So I feel personally it's only fair to match what they're currently receiving for the PPP for us to do the same. So I would propose an amendment of 5% to change from 1% to 5%.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Representative Crank. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman Anderson.
are we referring to page 15, line 4? Is that where we're referring to, or is somewhere else?
Page 15. Yes, line 4, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up one more amendment we need to discuss later. So, yeah, go ahead. Let's see. I had, okay, Representative Duncan, Senator Rothfuss, and then Representative Laux.
So in my conversations behind this, the institutions were okay, and with this, the only problem is that the PPPs were the forgiveness portion was coming due around the same time that this was going to be launched. So they were a little worried about that portion, but the 1% seemed really unfair considering they were already receiving 5% from the PPP. So I felt it was only fair that we offered the same amount of what they're going to of what they're currently receiving. So that's where the background of my motion.
Okay, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I understand that's what the feds are doing, but to me that seems too high. And I understand that it sounds like in conversations, 1 is probably too low. The possibilities are, 2% seems rational. It still ends up being around $3 million if all the funds are distributed. And again, the idea that you couldn't get somebody to distribute $150 million of someone else's money for $3 million or less seems challenging to me. I will take that gig if needed. I can be that guy. Another possibility is to just include any fees and costs as part of the language, but I would resist 5%. It's $7.5 million of the $150 million going to banks to distribute our money, or not our money, it's federal funds coming through us with no risk. It just seems richer than it needs to be. I want to make sure that as much of that money gets to the small businesses as possible. And that's not going to help.
Representative Laux.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. First of all, the PPP loan, it wasn't 5% across the board. It was a sliding scale of some sort, and I sure can't describe it. I know that on the bigger loans, they surely weren't making 5%. And I wish I would have heard from some of my bankers. I mean, several of them I'm working on projects with, and nobody reached out to me on it. I think 5% is way too high. I guess I'm open to discussion to raise it to 1.5% or something. I'd like to hear Rips and Furphy's comment, being in that industry. Thank you very much.
Yep, Representative Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what I'm hearing, particularly from the small banks, is they're overwhelmed currently with the PPP program. A lot of them are working 80-hour weeks, and they're just saying, wow, to take on this additional burden is going to be very difficult for them. So I think we've got to entice them with pretty high fees to try to encourage them to participate in this program. But as I said, it's going to still be difficult for the small banks to pull this off.
Okay. I'm sorry, Representative Crankton Burkhart, I believe.
So a little question I have, do these loans then become a competition with the bank? If we're giving money out at 0% interest for 10 years, have we taken some thing away from the banks, and that nobody needs a loan for $300,000 for the next 2 years or so? Is that a concern, or am I over thinking the thing?
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether the loan is for $10,000 or $100,000, the amount of work is pretty much the same. And, I don't think we can aggregate all of this and say the bank is going to get $7.5 million. The information I have from my bankers is they may not even be interested even at 5%. The amount of work that they put into PPP, some of them don't feel it was worth it to them. So I would say 5% as a minimum. I'm not trying to make people rich, but they need to recoup their costs. They have computer systems and people to do this, and a lot of the small banks were really overwhelmed by the PPP program. So I would say I wouldn't go any lower than 5%.
Okay. But just did Senator Beitman, did I see your hand move? Yeah. You've got that back screen, so you got to be right there. So Senator Beitman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, if we wanted to make this easier on the banks, we would have just made it a grant. And I still believe this needs to be a grant. But I lost that vote. I just think we're going down the wrong road here with this loan program. I wish this would be a grant. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Beitman. Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Beitman. I would like to have it be a grant program too, but I guess that's not going to happen. I talked to some bankers, and they had done a lot on the PPP, and they would do this also. We discussed the 1%. They, of course, would like to have more. They'd like to have 2%, but they said they would do it at 1% also. So I'm saying if our bankers don't want to do it, the Wyoming Business Council will do it direct. So I don't think we're going to lose if we have some banks that don't want to do it, because some are going to want to do it. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think one of the things that I'm hearing really gets to the fact that, and this has been discussed, small loans are brutal because they take the same amount of work as the large loans. But the idea that somebody needs 5% on a $300,000 loan, I think you can do it for less than that. If we include fees, so if it's 2% plus fees, for example, so banking fees, standard cost, fixed cost, whatever they've got, some sort of a schedule associated with that, so that they'll get some rational amount of money for every transaction, plus an overall fee, so that they end up making a little more on the larger loans. Perhaps that's a way that we can achieve the interests that have been expressed so far, with the exception of the grant concern, and that's a different discussion of whether we make this a grant.
So I would go ahead, Senator Coe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not support the 5%. This is a crisis we're in, folks. And what we're referring to here with my banking background, this is a loan origination fee. The banks get compensated for processing the fees, and golly, 5% is ridiculous in my way of thinking, because we're all in this together. We're asking the banks to step up. If they don't want to do it, like Senator Anderson says, the Business Council can do it. But this is nothing more than a fee, a loan origination fee that they're going to collect to process the loan. So I'd urge that we come back with something more palatable, maybe 2% plus fees, like Senator Rothfuss talks about. To me, that'd be reasonable in this crisis that we're all in. So I would speak against the amendment.
I'm going to make some general comments. One is, I'm a little concerned about opening that up for fees. I'd rather we had a set percentage, because with the SBA loans, what happened is there were no fees. The SBA simply paid their 5% or whatever that on that scale. That did not come out of the loan to the businesses. So I prefer to stick to that formula. Whether it's 2% or 5% or 1% is for this committee to decide. I still want to go back to the issue that whether is that the banks, in my opinion, are better suited to be able to get these funds out to those businesses that need them the very most. They're going to know that. My community, and I haven't counted them, but a community of 5,000, we have 7 banks. That is going to be the best, the most efficient way to get these funds to our businesses, in my opinion. That's a compliment to the banks. They should take it as such. Additionally, to Senator Coe's point, these banks, and this will address Representative Krink's concern, these banks are going to look at their businesses, their files, their customers that are in need and in danger of closing their doors, and going to encourage them and help them get these put in place, and encourage them and help them get the loan forgiven as quickly as possible. So those are my 2 cents on this. Whether we pay them more to do that, to service them, that's fine with me. But so I just want to make those comments. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good points. And I didn't mean to imply that there would be fees on the customer side. I just really meant, what are the actual costs to the bank of processing this? So like, what's my actual service side cost? And it could be as easy as this: the council shall pay a fee of $500 plus 1% of the amount of each loan.
Okay. If that's the case, it needs to be specific in my mind.
That's fine. That's fine.
Bank fees go on my balance sheet, and I have to carry them out over time, and they don't look good on my audit, so I don't like them.
I understand.
So, okay. So the question before us is to go from 1% to 5%. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Is the committee ready to vote? I'm seeing the head shake yes. All those in favor of raising the service fee from 1% to 5%, please raise your hand. Okay. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to vote that's 5. Those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That motion has failed. Okay, anything further on it? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would move to amend line 4. The council shall pay a fee of $500 plus 1 1/2% of the amount of each loan to the financial institution, et cetera. $500 plus 1 1/2%.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Okay, there is no second. So that dies for lack of a second. Any further discussion on this point?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair, and then Senator Wassenberger had his hand up.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to on line 4, page 15, instead of a 1%, 2% of the amount of each loan.
Okay, Senator Wassenberger is making a second to that. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of that motion, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Those opposed? Representative Lux. Okay. All right. That motion carries. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other consideration here is, again, the reason I wanted that base price is for small loans. You can imagine a circumstance where somebody wants a $10,000 loan. 2% of that is going to be $200. And I can see where banks are not going to be enthusiastic about $200 to process a loan. One third consideration we could have is but not less than concept. For example, the council shall pay a fee of, we now have 2% of the amount of each loan, but not less than, and then whatever that number would be. Is $500 a rational number where it's in the interest of a bank to process a small loan? I don't know. I'm not a banker. I guess I would refer to Representatives Henderson and Furphy if that would be beneficial.
Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, that's a good point, but I think some of those smaller loans will be done by the business council because the banks aren't going to tear into them. And the business council is just going to have to do some of those and not rely on the banking system. But the banking system, we need the banking system working this, and they will work the larger loans, I think. So I think we're still all right.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Senator Anderson. The business council is not really in the banking business. This isn't what they do. And I really do think they need the bank's involvement in this. And I'm not sure even at 2% we're going to get much bank involvement. I really don't know for sure. But I think, you know, the banks aren't getting rich off of these loans. There's a lot that goes into servicing a loan over time. And I think the business council really does need the bank involvement. So with that, whatever we can do to entice the banks to participate would be great with me.
Representative Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, $500 fee is not going to incentivize the banks to do even the small loans. It's well over $1,000 just to put a loan on a system. So I'm just passing that on.
Okay, any further discussion? Can we, okay, all right, this, Mr. Fuller, keep us moving, please.
Mr. Chairman, moving on now to page 16, lines 6 through 8. This increased the maximum amount of the loan to $300,000. And then on the bottom of page 16, there were a couple of changes to the credit against the principal. It was just candled out into 2 subparagraphs. The first one was the existing language plus the amendment that says that all fees imposed by statute that are paid during the loan term are eligible for a credit. And then moving on to the top of page 17, this provides an amount equal to 12% of the eligible business's gross payroll during the loan term is also a credit. The staff comment, Mr. Chairman, based on some comments that were made Thursday regarding the nature of sales tax and how that would serve as a credit, the committee may wish to consider adding the words "or remitted" to account for businesses that collect sales tax from customers and then remit those to the Department of Revenue.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Fuller. Senator Rothfuss.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Duncan. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that is unanimous. 14. Okay.
And then, Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 18, there is a staff comment there. And based on the committee's discussion regarding forgiveness or retirement of loans, the committee in subsection E, which is back on the bottom of page 17, may wish to consider adding or retirement or forgiveness of loans. And the way this would read if that amendment was made in subsection E would be no expenditure of funds or retirement or forgiveness of loans shall be made except in accordance with state and federal laws.
Okay. So committee, this is my ask of to address the concerns that were raised. As I've said to the committee, I've received, you know, we all operate under a certain set of instructions. I don't disagree with the comments on the semantics of a loan versus a grant, but we're sitting with a loan. That's why this committee got to work this. It was one of the directives to allow this to come to us to be worked versus maybe having management council work this bill. But I think we need to have a safety net in case the federal guidance isn't any clearer than it is today, that all these loans will be forgiven before the end of the CARES Act runs out, just to ensure that we don't have an issue down the road. So that's all that is a safety net. I think that addresses Representative Ayer, a question that he had brought up early on. It'll make me feel better in the long run as well. So Representative Duncan.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Representative Ayer. Any discussion? Mr. Fuller.
And Mr. Chairman, just to clarify the motion, is that to make the change in subsection E and then also insert the language that would be a new subsection F?
Yeah, to make it conform and fit. Yes. Okay. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That is unanimous. Okay, keep us moving, Mr. Fuller. I've got a marketing meeting here shortly.
All right, Mr. Chairman, moving on to section 4, in the definition on page 19 going to page 20, the phrase "and expenses incurred by Wyoming employers to comply with public health guidelines for the health and safety of Wyoming employees" was inserted. Then to page 22, lines 1 and 2, this increased the maximum amount of this stipend, the COVID-related expenses stipend, to $500,000 from $200,000.
So we're going to call those the Beitman amendments. Is that okay, Senator? All right.
And then, Mr. Chairman, lastly, on page 23, line 5, the appropriation was increased from $25 million to $50 million.
Another Beitman amendment. Okay. All right. What did I see? Senator Rothfuss. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, based on some of the discussion, I guess one of the last things that we could potentially consider is prioritizing the 3 programs differently, kind of like what Senator Beitman did last time. It seems like everybody likes grant better than loan. That's one of the things that I've sensed. It might be worthwhile to move some of the loan dollars to the grant dollars, But I don't know if we really have a sense of what the demand is going to be and if we've ended up doing those calculations and refining them based on our updated numbers. So I'd ask, do we have a sense of demand on these dollars that's better than what we had before when we sort of roughed them out?
Well, Senator Rothfuss, I think if you want to address that, we should go back to the amendment we did to begin with, where we set a 25% flex between the programs and change that number to a higher number. See how the programs work, and then just give more flex authority to the executive to move between the programs. I think that's, I can't answer that. I don't think anybody can ask what the demand
Right.
for the three programs.
Right. Mr. Chairman, follow up. So, and maybe we should do that. I'd be interested in what the rest of the committee thinks, because I would like to make sure personally that the first program doesn't run out of funds. I don't want anyone to come up short on the first program. It's a good program. And if we ended up shorting a program, I'd certainly rather have it be the second one relative to the first one. And I don't know what the rest of the group thinks, but I'd be curious to hear their thoughts.
Yeah, Representative Duncan, okay. So what's, I have to do this math. We have 175 million, right? So there'd be 43,750,000 that could be flexed out of the second program right now as the bill stands into the first program, which is almost a doubling of that appropriation. So if we want to do more, it's committee's prerogative. I'm fine. Okay, Senator Rothfuss.
Well, for the sake of discussion, let's find out if we want to do more. I'll move that we move $25 million from the current loan program over to grant program 1. So it would then read 75 million for grant program 1 and 150 million for loan program. See what this group thinks. That's my motion.
There's a second by Senator Beitman. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that fails. I think, Senator Rothfuss, I think the flex authority in the B11 at least gives me a great deal of comfort with it. So, yeah. Representative Ayer, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had the same comment. I think the 25% flexibility, if we pass this amendment, would be very adequate. And I suppose we're going to be meeting again throughout the year. We come back and change this if need be.
Yeah, keep in mind, we're meeting on June 1. I'm sure we'll get a full update. I hope to see that grant program up and running. We'll have that opportunity in 2 weeks to start addressing this stuff right away. So, okay, any further discussion on this bill? So we have it's 020 LSO 070. Working draft 0.08 as amended by the committee today. COVID-19 business relief programs. Any further discussion? Representative McGuire. Then Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for my own clarity, and I'm going to ask for your indulgence and the indulgence of the committee. So right now, under section 2, if we had a small business, maybe it was a husband and a wife, and they've got a rafting company. They're not currently working, or they were not currently working on March, but they were going to hire 10 full-time employees May 1st and keep those full-time employees for 6 months. But all of their reservations have been canceled. So as of right now, they're not going to hire anybody. Would they receive anything under section number 2? And if so, how much would that be? Thank you.
The bill would be, yeah, they get 15,000 plus, as we calculate both a husband and wife working, they would get $19,000 with a grant with a 1-page application, hopefully by the end of May.
Well, I guess my question is, did we change the definition of a full-time employee? Are they going to get anything more than the 15,000?
My understanding they would be. And I think we've got to trust the business council to set that down in emergency rules. This committee has made clear direction that we want to be generous with that grant program. I think that's why we stuck with the language that was in there. So I don't know if somebody sees it different, that's fine. But okay, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go back to page 15, paragraph A, where we talked about the percentages going to banks. And I'll propose an amendment conceptually that says to assist if the business council handles these loans directly, that they may contract for services to help them do that.
Okay, we can put that in there. However, this discussion was had as a business council because the CARES Act dollars allow CARES Act dollars to be spent for servicing programs. So that means instead of that money coming out of this program, even these fees, they would come out of other CARES Act dollars, protecting the overall integrity of the grants we want to give to people. But the council would have the authority to do that. They would be able to temporary workers. We don't need or to contract with outside services. So I don't think.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Chairman Anderson. You're on mute, Chairman. Chairman Anderson, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how many dollars we're actually talking about here on this bill. And I think section 2 is still remaining at 175 million. Section 3 is at 300 million. And I believe section 4 is at 50 million. So we're talking about 425 million, I believe is what this dollar amount is now. And the reason I say that is President Perkins asked me to make sure we didn't overdo it. And I don't think we have. I think we're all right on the 425 million if those numbers are correct.
I have us at 275 million. Is that correct, Mr. Fuller?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. It's 50 for the first grant. It's 50 for each grant program and 175 for the loan program.
So section 2 is 275?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Anderson, the entire bill, the total amount of appropriations in the bill is $275 million.
I'm looking at section 3 says 300 million. Maybe I'm looking at that wrong.
Mr. Chairman, on
page 16, line 7.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's the total amount of the maximum amount of each loan is $300,000.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what is the amount for section 2 then? What did you say?
Mr. Chairman, so just walking through each of the three programs, the first stipend program, which is the business interruption, the total appropriation is $50 million. For the loan program in section 3, the total appropriation is $175 million. And then for the section 4, the second stipend program for the COVID related expenses, the total appropriation is $50 million.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know that we all want to go. I did have some language which would be a solution to the concerns that Representative McGuire raised. I think without hurting the interests that others have raised, and I just wanted to float that and see if the group wanted to go that direction or not. I'm comfortable with Romanet 3 paragraph on page 9, but I'll raise a concept to try and assuage some of the concerns if it's okay with you.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's Representative McGuire's question's a good one. And if you've got something that can help us with reinvent the wheel, that would be great to make it more clear.
So Mr. Chairman, we've done this in a lot of other legislation where you basically have two paths for calculations and you get to pick the greater of them. So that's what I'm saying in this instance, where right now this path, as you see in Romanet 3, this is again for everyone on page 9, Romanet 3 there for the B paragraph. That would be in place. But if you do have seasonal employees, allow for alternative language. So it would basically, I'll read through how it would sound. Romanet 3 be $15,000 plus the greater of, then this language as you see it, going down to line 9 on March 31st, comma 2020. So that's an option. Or $2,000 for every full-time equivalent employee, which for purposes of this paragraph shall be determined by dividing all verifiable Wyoming employee hours worked between March 31st, 2019 and March 31st, 2020 by 2,080 hours, with the business owner counted as one equivalent full-time employee, period. In no event shall a stipend issued under this section exceed $50,000.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Furphy. Okay, discussion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't see Representative McGuire liking it, so I'll withdraw the motion if he doesn't want it.
I think it's a good motion myself.
Oh, he does want it. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good motion. I think that solves, that fits that gap. It solves the issue if somebody's only been in business for 6 months. It solves all the issues that have been raised so far on this call. So, okay. Any discussion by the committee? Do you understand the motion? It's the best of both worlds. Representative Laux.
Please, yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, can you repeat it so I can write it down thoroughly again? I thought I got it, but.
Absolutely. And I will immediately send this out. In fact, why don't I send it right this second? And then I will read it. My apologies for this brief delay. Okay. 1 second. Now that I sent it, I'm struggling to get it.
Mr. Chairman, while he's struggling,
go ahead.
I'd like to move against the amendment. I think it complicates the bill again, and we have it covered with what we have. So I'm opposed to the amendment.
Okay. All right. Senator Rothfuss,
thanks.
Just wrap it up.
Yep, I'm back just to reread it again for the public because it's sent to everybody now. Romanet 3 would be $15,000, comma, plus the greater of, then existing language, an additional $2,000 for every one full-time employee and an additional $1,000 for every one part-time employee that the eligible business had employed in Wyoming on March 31st, 2020, comma, or $2,000 for every full-time equivalent employee, which for purposes of this paragraph shall be determined by dividing all verifiable Wyoming employee hours worked between March 31st, 2019 and March 31st, 2020 by 2,080 hours, with the business owner counted as one equivalent full-time employee. Although that should probably be switched, full-time equivalent employee, I see now. So I'll give Brian latitude to conform that language because I think that was a bad parallel there. It's basically all the language we heard as an alternative, addressing Senator Anderson's concerns. I don't think it really complicates it. It just gives two options for calculating, and you get to choose the greater of them. So whichever works better for your company. If you're a seasonal company, this is going to work better for you pursuant to what Representative McGuire laid out. If you're not, then I would expect most probably just end up with what we had. So urge and I vote for it. I think it works pretty well.
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Okay. so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those opposed? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that passes. All right. Committee, anything further? Okay, sensing we are ready to Representative Air.
Sorry for the delay, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Did we approve this proposed amendment on giving the 25% flexibility?
Yeah, Representative Air, we did that in the first amendment that was handed out by LSO either last night or this morning. I can't remember which, but yeah, we sure did. Yep. Okay. Okay. So we are ready. Are we ready for the question on 20 LSO 0706 working draft 0.8 as amended today?
Question.
Question being called by Representative Duncan. This will require a roll call vote. Mr. Fuller, would you assist?
Senator Beitman.
Aye.
Senator Coe.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Wasserberger.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Aye.
Representative Crank.
Aye.
Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Representative Air.
Aye.
Representative Furphy.
Aye.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Laux.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Chairman Anderson.
Aye.
Chairman Greer.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
It carries unanimously. Committee, thank you. This is really the right committee to address this. I have one quick ask before we go. So this will be turned over. This will be heard, as I understand the rules, on committee of the whole as we move through the special session. It will be important for this committee to help support every one of us to help support this through. I think this, regardless of it not being perfect, we need to get these funds out to our businesses. So I ask everyone to do your part to help push this forward. I do have one more ask of our committee. We were assigned by Management Council several different topics that we'll take up on June 1st and 2nd in addition, or maybe we'll modify our amendment. I'll get those out to you, but there was one topic we were assigned, and I'm just not going to have the time to work on it. And it deals with unemployment in the work share program. And Representative Conley has done some work with Workforce Services. I know Senator Rothfuss said he would work on that. I said I would. It's something I feel strongly about. I was curious if we could get maybe another House member to work with Senator Rothfuss or another senator, however we wanted to do that, to maybe take that up as and just work it as a subgroup, get some of that information. There's a real benefit to us doing this correctly. So are there any volunteers for that? I see we're doing the Hollywood Squares there, Representative McGuire.
Representative McGuire, all of our screens are set up differently, so we have no idea who you're pointing to.
So, Representative Furphy, are you volunteering for that?
Well, since the other two are from Laramie, might make sense if I participate.
Okay. No, I think that would be good. There's a real issue on how we can help protect Wyoming businesses by having a program in place statutorily. There's a temporary program. It's relatively complex, involves federal rules. I just think we need to have a subcommittee flesh this out. Representative Duncan?
I'd be willing to help.
Thank you. I was going to appoint you anyway. Okay, there you go. We're good. All right. Yeah, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Can we assume that you and Chairman Anderson will be floor managing this in each chamber?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I would normally ask for a volunteer, but I'll floor manage it, but I'll need all the members' help, most definitely.
So, Mr. Chairman, these are mirror bills?
Yeah, that's what I understand the process. Yeah.
All of them are going to be the other three that we received too?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So if we have any amendments or anything that's earth shattering, we should work really hard as a joint committee to bring them mere amendments. Primarily so I'm not wasting all my Saturday in conference committee. So, Representative Duncan.
So quick question, and we could probably do this offline, but are we going to have some modified rules in terms of really shortened debate, really shortened time back and forth so that we can have a really good, quick, efficient way to get through this whole process, more like our second readings and
Yeah,
just
there is. And Senator Rothfuss, do you know if the amended rules are posted on the Management Council website? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I think they were posted for consideration, and I think we adopted them without amendments. So we should see those on the last Management Council meetings website. We might have amended minutely, but really, by and large, what you'll see there are accurate.
And
Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, those are posted on LSO's home website, right on the homepage.
I think Speaker Harshman and Senator Perkins also kind of sent out, might have been late last night. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but sort of a step-by-step, here's how this is go, or how we hope it goes process. I don't know what's going to happen for sure, but yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
And just to note that process a little bit, the a change to the rules requires a 2/3 vote since rules are already underway. So we would need to, as the first order of business, we'll be operating under existing rules. We will need to adopt alternative rules by that 2/3, and that would then expedite the process so that it takes less time and allows for the mirror bills, and then the mirror bills will be voted on through a list, which is it'll kind of be like a consent list, but with the ability to debate whether things should be added to or taken off that list.
Okay, well, committee, great work. Isn't perfect, but I think it's good. It's we had some good amendments and some great discussion. And again, all we're trying to do is what's best for the people here in Wyoming, and we'll keep working hard. So I think with that, if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting, Mr. Fuller. Okay. Thank you. We'll see you all Friday, I guess.